Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to ISSUP South Africa's first webinar. We hope that this will not be the last, but we hope that we can continue processing and progressing and growing the chapter as we continue to bring together the substance use professionals throughout South Africa. For those of you I have not met, I am Roger Wyman. I am one of the conveners of ISSUP South Africa chapter, and thank you once again to ISSUP Global for setting this up. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the questions panel, and we will have a brief question and answer session at the end of David's presentation. In terms of certificates, there is an automatic certificate that will be available in about 2 days. We will be recording this session and posting it on the ISSUP Global YouTube channel, and that link will also be available on the South Africa chapter's website. For those of you who do not know what ISSUP is the International Society of Substance Use Professionals, and we are a new chapter in South Africa. And what we really are trying to do, the basic premise behind the chapter is to bring together those people operating in prevention and treatment of substance use throughout South Africa. It's a great opportunity for us to share the knowledge, share research, share best practice techniques that are happening throughout the country, and to create a more professional and stable substance use network throughout the country. So if you're not a member yet, please feel free to log on to ISSUP and join ISSUP as a member. At the moment, membership for ISSUP South Africa is free. It's a perfect opportunity now to register as a member. All right, I'm going to quickly introduce our presenter for this session, and David Bayever. David is a pharmacist that qualified in 1972. In 1995, he joined the South African Association of Community Pharmacists as the national convener of the Drug Wise campaign. He also serves on the South African Pharmacy Council as an assessor, examiner, and a researcher. David has been a member of the Central Drug Authority, or the CDA, since 2000, and is currently the chairperson of that authority. He also serves as a member of SAHPRA, Cannabis Working Committee, and a member of the technical task team on public health dimensions of narcotic drugs and psychotropic substance problems. He is also a director of the South African Institute for Drug-Free Sport. His academic career includes, he was the head of the Division of Pharmacotherapy from 2002 to 2015, as a lecturer, a researcher, and author of Drug-Wise Guide to Substance Abuse, published by CPS. He is also a qualified counselor in addiction prevention and recovery, a member of the International Society of Substance Use Professionals. He is a fellow of the Pharmaceutical Society of South Africa, a commissioner of Global Centre of Credentialing and Certification, and General Secretary of Green Crescent South Africa. So I'll hand over to David. And David, thank you very, very much for being our very first ISSUP South Africa presenter. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much. They had dependents, they had friends, they had colleagues. Their lives were cut short by a virus that caused human and economic devastation across the world. In recording and reporting on the daily number of new infections, death and recovery, we can too easily lose track of the fact that we are dealing with human lives. This is taking a heavy toll, not only on the health of our people, but also on our people's ability to earn a living, to feed themselves and their family, and to learn to develop. But they also enjoy the daily freedom that we have taken for granted. These are the words of our president addressing the nation on our regular updates. What was the president referring to? It is the coronavirus that we've all become too familiar with, SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. Let's have a look. What is COVID-19? It belongs to the family of a single-stranded RNA virus called coronaviridae, a coronavirus named after its crown-like spikes on its surface, which is how it gets into the name coronaviridae. The viridae is a common type of virus that affects birds, mammals, and reptiles. It is a microscopic agent that infects living organisms, often causing tissue disease. It consists of RNA or DNA surrounded by a protein coat, but it is unable to replicate without a host. We will unpack all of this a little bit later. You might have heard about other viruses. For example, there was the SARS coronavirus, SARS meaning severe acute respiratory syndrome, which broke out in 2002, and the MERS or Middle East respiratory syndrome, a coronavirus outbreak in September 2012 in Saudi Arabia. There are others which all just cause what we know as the common cold. SARS in 2002 infected more than 8,000 people and resulted in nearly 800 deaths, while MERS infected only around 2,500 people, but led to more than 850 deaths. The virus we're dealing with now is called SARS-CoV-2, and the disease it causes is the coronavirus disease 2019, or commonly COVID-19. In general, we have seen how a virus and a disease can have different names. For example, we're all aware of the virus HIV that causes AIDS, and we know about a disease called measles, which is caused by the rubella virus. So how does it spread? Bats are natural reservoirs for many viruses. So the virus can replicate itself inside the bat without making the bat feel sick. And then the bat passes it on to other animals, and then finally onto humans. And that is what happened in Wuhan, China. After the first person was infected, the virus was passed on to the next person, and the rest is now history. It is spread by people coughing and sneezing. In just one cough, we can spray 3,000 droplets of the contagious viral infection that attacks primarily the throat and the lungs. If the droplet lands in the air, it can stay for anything up to 3 hours. And if the virus lands on a particle, it will stay for 2 to 3 days, for example, on plastic. The person-to-person spread of SARS is estimated to be between 1.4 and 2.5, which is referred to as the reproductive number, meaning the average number of cases a single case will generate. So one infected person could infect 1.4 to 2.5 people. What actually happens in your body when you contract the coronavirus? Let's assume you touch an infected surface or you touch your face and you become infected. When the virus enters the body, it uses the proteins on its surface to enter the cells in your body. Those proteins are like keys that unlock receptors on the outside of the cell. We believe it is specifically the angiotensin converting enzyme 2, or ACE2 as we commonly know it, receptor on our lungs that coronavirus is using to get inside our cells. ACE2 is a protein on the surface of many cell types, which cut up the larger protein angiotensin and then go to regulate functions in the cell. Hence, the ACE2 acts as a cellular doorway, a receptor for the virus that causes COVID-19. It is found on tissue including the lungs, the heart, the blood vessels, the kidney, the liver, and the gastrointestinal tract. It lines the tissue and is meant to form a protective barrier. The protein shell provides this hard protective enclosure for the genetic material, but both the typical influenza virus and the coronavirus use their spikes to get inside a cell, inside the body, where it takes over the cell's internal machinery, reproducing and repurposing it to build components of the new virus. Once the virus is inside, it then releases RNA, its genetic material, and causes your cells to make copies of the virus. The cell produces thousands of viruses, and in the beginning, you don't actually realize it because you don't have any of the symptoms. This is referred to as the incubating period. It differs for different viruses, but in the case of SARS-CoV-2, the incubation period is about 4 days. Some literature gives it at 2 days and others up to 7 days. So for about 4 days, you have been infected and you don't even know it, as you are symptom-free or the symptoms are so mild that you don't feel ill. As the virus started spreading in China, doctors saw a viral illness that reminded them of the SARS outbreak of 2002. They became concerned, and eventually on the 9th of January in 2020, China Central Television announced that there was a new SARS-CoV-2 virus. By that stage, 50 people were admitted with pneumonia, and they had suffered their first fatality. Then the World Health Organization labeled this outbreak a pandemic called COVID-19. Let's have a look then at what are the symptoms. We in South Africa are lucky that we have been able to learn from the information coming out of China and other countries, which enabled us to know what to prepare for and what to expect. When an infected person talks, coughs, or sneezes, droplets carrying the virus may land in your mouth or your nose and then move into your lungs. So the most common symptom or fever, sore throat, and cough, some shortness of breath, is what we will experience. If we look at fever in the early stages, only 43% of positive cases had fever. Only later do about 88% of the patients develop the fever. So testing for fever, which we can still find to be normal, doesn't guarantee that you don't have the coronavirus. Less common symptoms are the nausea, the vomiting, and the diarrhea, and in about 3 to 5% of the cases this is present. Others present with shortness of breath, chest pains that don't subside, high fever, confusion, or even blue-tinged lips. This would be due to severe symptoms. Interestingly, the WHO definition of cases of COVID-19 was changed on the 13th of March of 2020. It is now based purely on symptoms only, regardless of travel history or even contact with confirmed cases. That is why we have seen government's testing program being scaled up. So this could look like a normal case of a flu, where once inside your body, the virus comes into contact with cells in your throat, nose, or lungs, and would travel inside a sac made from your cell membrane to your cell's nucleus that houses all its genetic material. The coronavirus, on the other hand, doesn't need to enter the host cell's nucleus. It can directly access parts of the host cell called ribosomes. The ribosomes use genetic information from the virus to make viral proteins, such as the spikes on the virus's surface. A packaging structure on your cell then carries the spike in vesicles, which merge with your cell's outer layer, the cell membrane. All the parts needed to create a new virus gather just beneath your cell's membrane, and then a new virus begins to bud up from the cell's membrane. Now, with the virus spreading in your body, the patient could develop what we call ARDS, which is the acute respiratory syndrome. For this, we have to look inside the lung, because this is a condition where the lungs develop so much inflammation and damage that it becomes difficult to get oxygen out of the air through the lungs and into the red blood cells. Each lung has a different section, which is called the lobes. Normally, as you breathe, the air moves freely through your trachea or windpipe, then through the large tubes called bronchi, and the smaller tubes called the bronchioles, and finally through the tiny sacs called the alveoli. Your airway and alveoli are flexible and springy. When you breathe in, each air sac inflates like a balloon, and when you exhale, the sacs deflate. Small blood vessels called capillaries surround the alveoli. Oxygen from the air that you breathe passes from your alveoli into the capillaries and the carbon dioxide from your body passes out of your capillaries into the alveoli, and so your lungs can get rid of them as you exhale. Your airways catch those germs in the mucus that lines the tracheae, the bronchi, and the bronchioles. In a healthy body, hair-like cilia lining the tubes constantly push the mucus and the germs out of your airways, where you might expel them when you cough. Normally, the cells of your immune system attack the viruses, and the germs that make past your mucus and the cilia enter into the alveoli. However, if your immune system is weakened, like in the case of pneumonia or a coronavirus infection, the virus can overwhelm your immune system, and your bronchioles and your alveoli become inflamed as your immune system attacks the multiplying viruses. The inflammation can cause the alveoli to fill with fluid, making it difficult for your body to get the oxygen that it needs. You could get lobar pneumonia, where one lobe of your lung is infected, or you could get a bronchopneumonia, which affects many areas of both lungs. The odds cause difficulty in breathing, chest pain, coughing, fever and chills, confusion, headaches, muscle pain, and fatigue. It can also lead to more serious complications. Complete respiratory failure occurs when your breathing becomes so difficult that you need a machine called a ventilator to help you breathe. These are the machines that save lives, and the medical supply companies have ramped up production for. These machines force oxygen into the back of the lungs using an ECMO, which is the extracorporeal membrane oxygenation or ventilator machine. So who is at risk then of catching COVID-19? Everyone is at risk. It doesn't matter what age you are. Whether you develop these symptoms depends on a lot of other factors besides your age, and whether you already have a pre-existing underlying health condition like heart disease, lung disease, immunosuppression, or diabetes. What we have seen is that 68% of cases of people between the ages of 30 to 69 years of age, and of those people, only 20% of them had symptoms of severe illness. So it is not only the elderly who are infected, but who tend to have a higher fatality rate. While this is all sounding very scary, the push to develop a coronavirus is moving at high speed. Studies of other coronaviruses led more researchers to assume that people who have recovered from SARS-CoV-2 infection could be protected from reinfection for a period of time. But that assumption needs to be backed by empirical evidence, and some studies suggest otherwise. There are several different approaches for a potential vaccine against the coronavirus. The basic idea is that you would get a shot of what contains a faint version of the virus. The vaccine would expose your body to the virus that is so weak that to cause an infection, but just strong enough to stimulate an immune response. Within a few weeks, the cells in your body's immune system would make markers called antibodies, which would be specific for only the coronavirus, or specifically a spike protein. Antibodies then attach to the virus and prevent it from attaching to your cells. Your immune system then responds to signals from antibodies by consuming and destroying the clumps of viruses. If you then catch the real virus at any stage, your body would recognize and destroy it. In other words, your immune system has been primed. Collecting evidence on whether this will be possible, safe, and effective is part of what takes researchers so long to develop a vaccine. It is a race against time to develop a vaccine amid a pandemic. Each step in vaccine development usually takes months, if not years. Developing a vaccine during a pandemic brings additional challenges. For example, the Zika epidemic ended before the vaccine was available. Thus, efficacy trials, which are the first step and vital, were not completed. An Ebola vaccine broke records by being ready in 5 years. The hope here is to develop one for the new coronavirus in a record-breaking 12 to 18 months. Assuming any of the trials are successful and that an effective vaccine or vaccines are developed, quickly producing hundreds of millions or even billions of doses will be another challenge, like requiring the construction of new manufacturing facilities. Thus, even if the early candidate vaccines prove immunogenic and safe, it is unlikely that a vaccine will be available within the next 24 months. So what do we do to treat patients? There is no specific treatment for the disease caused by this novel coronavirus. However, many of the symptoms can be treated, and therefore treatment is based purely on the patient's clinical condition. We are advising supportive care for infected persons, which includes physical and mental health, which can be highly effective. Currently, only remdesivir, which has been approved by the EUA, is available, but it's not available in South Africa and is not proven. So several other strategies are being used or studied through clinical trials, expanded access, or single patient emergency investigational new drug applications. Other drugs under investigation include Lopinavir, which is the first-line antiretroviral treatment in South Africa for HIV and AIDS, and hydroxychloroquine, with or without azithromycin. Although a recent observation study found that there was no clinical benefit associated with hydroxychloroquine. In spite of it not being a safe drug, hydroxychloroquine is, however, being studied both as a therapeutic option for patients with mild diseases to prevent hospitalization and as chemopreventive in high-risk healthcare workers. There are adverse effects for Lopinavir, which include gastrointestinal distress such as nausea and diarrhea, found in up to 28%, and hepatotoxicity in 2 to 10% of patients. In patients with COVID-19, these adverse effects may be exacerbated by combination therapy or viral infection, because approximately 20 to 30% of these patients already have elevated transaminase at the presentation with COVID-19. A recent randomized clinical trial showed that approximately 50% of Lopinavir patients experienced an adverse effect, and 14% of the patients discontinued therapy due to the gastrointestinal adverse effect. Agents previously used to treat SARS and MERS are potential candidates to treat COVID-19. Various agents where apparently in vitro activity against SARS-CoV-2 and MERS-CoV were used during the SARS and the MERS outbreaks, but were inconsistent efficacy. Meta-analysis of the SARS and the MERS treatment studies found no clear benefit of any of the specific regimens. Promising non-pharmacological strategies under investigation include the use of convalescent plasma collected from recovered patients. Published results to date have consisted of a handful of descriptive studies with small numbers of patients. Given the suggestion of modest benefits, multiple large clinical trials using convalescent plasma have begun. When President Ramaphosa declared a national state of disaster on the 15th of March in 2020, he did so on the advice of South Africa's leading public health experts and epidemiologists, including our world-class scientists at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. 2 weeks later, when he announced a national lockdown to halt the spread of the coronavirus and save lives, he did so again on the advice of our scientists. Experts advised government at the time that a lockdown was the only effective way to prevent an exponential and uncontrolled increase in the infection rate. The coronavirus has a binary effect. If it is controlled, its outcome can be fairly benign. But if it spreads rapidly, it overwhelms the healthcare system. The consequences are devastating. It is like the difference between a controlled burn set intentionally alight to maintain a forest and a wildfire. From the outset, government's primary objective has been to avoid a wildfire at all costs. We have seen the dire effects of a surge of infections in countries such as Italy, Spain, Brazil, and the United States and the United Kingdom. South Africans do not want to see bodies pile up in mass graves as hospitals are overwhelmed and there are not enough ventilators for all those who need care. Human beings have no immunity against the new virus. Airborne diseases are the most dangerous as they spread rapidly through the population. Until a vaccine is developed, we have few defenses against the virus. It is highly contagious, difficult to suppress in all populations. Although its case fatality rate is low, because we have no natural immunity, hundreds of thousands would die if it was left to spread. That is why an early and effective lockdown is the best weapon that we have. In our case, the lockdown gave us valuable time to build the capacity of our healthcare system, prepare field hospitals and quarantine sites, procure equipment, and train our healthcare workers. Although South Africa has managed better than almost any other country in the world, we have not been able to flatten the curve of infections. But we all agree that the lockdown is a blunt instrument, and it cannot go on indefinitely. Despite the unprecedented scale of emergency relief measures implemented by government, people have to go back to work, and businesses have to begin to earn revenue. The public health experts advising government have therefore suggested that the lockdown has served its purpose. It is time for South Africa to ease restrictions, allowing most economic activity to resume in most parts of our country. Reopening the economy, as many countries have already done and discovered, comes with serious risks of a second wave or resurgence of infections. Many of the world's worst clusters outbreaks elsewhere in the world have begun in factories, retail stores, and the workplace. If adequate protocols are not in place, or if too many workers return at once, the risk of this outbreak increases manifold. This is a delicate balancing act, and it requires care and precision. The lockdown has required sacrifices from all South Africans, but they have been worthwhile, and the scientific reasons speak for themselves. With all of the above having been said, we should be realizing that it is not social distancing that we should be promoting, but rather physical distancing and social connection, using all the digital media and apps available. This will ensure that we remain healthy on a physical level and psychological level too. I will talk a little bit more about that a little later. Talking about remaining physically strong and healthy then raises the question about protecting our immune system and the impact that substances have. And the first contentious issue is around lifting the ban on alcohol. I'm not arguing for or against any issue nor defending any stances. I simply want to present facts to help you discern what is a good or bad idea for our people and the effects that substances like alcohol can have on them. One of the realities of our society is the fact that there is a public health system challenge in South Africa and a lack of equality. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need for development of urgent strategies that will enable governments supported by society to slow and ultimately eliminate the iniquities of the health delivery system. Economic status matters profoundly when looking at ways to reduce the risk of exposure to SARS-CoV-2. Lower income workers are amongst the essential service workers who must work outside of the home or a closed or sheltered environment. It is difficult to control physical contact amongst people in the open, as there is no entrance control or screening. Many workers travel to work on buses and in taxis from neighborhood environments where there is an elevated exposure to poverty, poor quality housing, and even lack of sanitation and running water. This is compounded by psychosocial issues, violence, gangsterism, and general environmental stressors, which lead to drinking and smoking and the use of psychotropic substances. Greater exposure to and the clustering of stressors contribute to the poorer survival rate of people who live in compromised areas where there is limited health facility. In the short time, as the country struggles with the economic burden of the pandemic, efforts are necessary to address pressing needs for housing, food, and economic assistance for focusing on those of the poorest in wealth. Such efforts addressing the social determinants of health are like a vaccine to improve population health and create herd immunity. Against injustices in health, we need to educate the public about the harmful use of alcohol, and that is the only effect that drinking has is to make the poor poorer, financially as well as physically and socially. Alcohol abuse does nothing to developing herd immunity, which is what we need. The global epidemic of the disease represents one of the major global health challenges of current times and a formidable threat to the development and economies. The harmful use of alcohol is one of the leading risk factors contributing to preventable death from the disease. It is a causal factor in 60 types of diseases and injuries, and components cause 200 others. It also negatively affects the well-being and the health of people around those that consume alcohol in a harmful way. What we're experiencing now is a government trying to effectively address the health problems during the epidemic or the pandemic. Public health experts have recommended a series of actions and policies that is a responsible government must formulate, implement, monitor, and evaluate to reduce the burden attributable to harmful use of alcohol. Included are interventions that are highly cost-effective at a time when it is feasible to implement. During the current resource-constrained settings regulating alcohol beverage availability and raising awareness of public health problems to ensure support for policies are meaningful and should be included. These policies are the key to prevent alcohol-related harm and the high incidence of disease and injuries, besides the poverty eradication, good health and well-being, sustainable and safe cities, and communities with reduced inequality. We should not allow the inclusion of strong industry presence in public debates or their participation in policy-making processes, their aggressive marketing and promotion strategies, which are targeting the youth, and influential corporate social responsibility campaigns. The industry is an enabler and as such contributes to the serious and violent crime statistics. Our police minister, Shelley, reported that the number of cases dropped from 326 to 94. Rape cases dropped from 699 to 101. And cases of assault with intention to inflict grievous bodily harm dropped from 2,673 in the first week of the lockdown compared to the same period in 2019. Shelley attributed the drop of crime to, amongst other factors, that the prohibition on the sale and the movement of liquor during the lockdown. At the same time, he reported that the complaints about gender violence had increased. Police Minister Becky said that the police received more than 87,000 gender-based violence complaints during the first week of the 2021 national lockdown. There is reports that researchers wrote, isolation is an established abuse tactic for intimate partners' violence outside of the pandemic. But perhaps the most important observation about the control of alcohol sales and consumption during the pandemic is the evidence from a study first published in the Daily Maverick in October 2019. The article highlighted the conclusion that the fastest way to reduce gender-based violence is not changing men's attitude, but limiting their access to alcohol. This has been supported in a statement made by our President in an address in Parliament on gender-based violence, when he said, drug and alcohol abuse fuels gender-based violence. A study published in 20,000 already highlighted the evidence from a meta-analysis of studies done from as far back as 1984 showing that aggressive behavior and verbal abuse amongst men and women, albeit not at the same level, is likely to be increased by alcohol intoxication. WHO report stated that in South Africa, 65% of those experiencing spousal abuse within the last 12 months reported that their partners always or sometimes used alcohol before the assault. The same report includes a statement about how in South Africa, the belief that alcohol facilitates aggression have led to drinking so individuals can carry out the violence perceived to be socially acceptable. It is also reported in how in Australia, a community intervention that included restricting the hours of sale of alcohol within one town reduced the number of domestic violence victims presenting to hospitals. A study conducted by Navid Saleh and reported in a review article in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health shows that there was some benefit that could be derived from alcohol consumption, though. For example, the study found that in lower levels of intake, alcohol can be protective, while at higher levels it can be detrimental. Alcohol-specific factors also play a role, including the ethanol content, drinking frequency, and the beverage type, be it a beer, a wine, or a spirit. Women appear to benefit most from the lower levels of alcohol consumption with respect to ischemic heart diseases. Protection appears to be the same across the different types of alcohol. However, episodic heavy drinking, defined as 6 or more drinks in 24 hours, could boost the risk of heart attacks, particularly in the elderly. In the case of the conditions such as stroke, hypertension, colorectal cancer, liver cancer, diabetes, and obesity, the results were encouraging for those who are light or moderate drinkers. The authors warn, though, that even though alcohol may offer some protective effect, there is no reason to start drinking. For healthy adults, drinking no more than 1 drink for females or 2 drinks for males every day, especially red wine, is acceptable and relatively safe, and might be protective for the cardiovascular system. But occasional binge drinking should be avoided, wrote the researchers. Tobacco, on the other hand, poses a completely different question. Should we be considering a product that kills half of its users and 80% of them are people who live in low and middle income countries? We have been considering the health effects of the lockdown, which in spite of the impact on the economy, the health of the people was considered to be more important. The fact is, and the President has already made the statement, that as we move from level 3 to level 2, the ban on alcohol and tobacco will be lifted. The burden of tobacco-related illnesses and death is the heaviest in low and middle income countries like South Africa, while the use of tobacco contributes to poverty by diverting household spending from basic needs such as food and shelter to feeding an unhealthy addiction through smoking tobacco. This spending behavior is difficult to curb because nicotine is so addictive. This is where we can make a major contribution. The economic costs of tobacco use are substantial and compounded by the significant health care costs for treating the disease caused by tobacco use, as well as the cost of human capital and the results that tobacco attribute to morbidity and mortality. The effects of health remain that smoking kills more than 8 million people a year around the world. More than 7 million of those deaths are the result of direct tobacco use, while around 1.2 million are the result of non-smokers being exposed to secondhand smoke. There are more than 7,000 chemicals in tobacco smoke, of which at least 250 are known to be harmful and at least 69 are known to cause cancer. There is no safe level of exposure, not even for secondhand tobacco smokers. In adults, secondhand smoke causes serious cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, including coronary heart diseases and lung cancer. In infants, it raises the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. In pregnant women, It causes pregnancy complications and low birth weight. Secondhand smoke causes 65,000 children to die each year from illnesses attributed to secondhand smoke. The illicit trade in tobacco products contributes to major health, economic, and security concerns around the world, not only in South Africa. It is estimated that 1 of every 10 cigarettes and tobacco products consumed globally are illicit. The illicit market is supported by various players, ranging from petty peddlers to organized criminal networks involved in arms and human trafficking. And there is evidence that the tobacco industry itself is complicit and implicated. Internal industry documents released as a result of court cases demonstrate that the tobacco industry has actively fostered the illicit trade globally. It also works to block implementation of tobacco control measures, such as tax increases and pictorial health warnings, by misleading and arguing that they will fuel the illicit trade. Weak governance, high levels of corruption, poor government commitment to tackling illicit tobacco, ineffective customs and tax administration, and informal distribution channels for tobacco products are often of equal or greater importance, but sponsored by the tobacco industry behind the scenes behavior. Implementing and enforcing strong measures to control illicit trade enhances the effectiveness of significant increased tobacco taxes and prices, as well as strong tobacco control policies in reducing tobacco use and its health and economic consequences. While talking about tobacco, it is also important to recognize that the electronic nicotine delivery systems, or ENDS, may not be considered a tobacco product because they do not contain tobacco. They do, however, contain nicotine. However, they are still a serious public health concern. Long-term health effects of ENDS are still unknown, and further research is required. Reviews to date of empirical evidence from chemical and toxicological studies, and to a lesser degree clinical studies, have led various authors to conclude that ENDS are not harmless, but are generally less dangerous than cigarettes. The use of products containing nicotine in any form among the youth and pregnant women, including ENDS, is unsafe. These products all contain toxic substances, which they inhale, and they may increase the risk of cancer and cardiovascular or pulmonary diseases. Inhaling the aerosol exhaled by end users increases exposure of non-smokers and bystanders to nicotine and a number of their intoxicants. We as the public also have rights and should support tobacco control from all commercial and other vested interests related to ENDS, including the interests of the tobacco industry. Our president explained that this was done not with vindictiveness. We had to shut down the whole economy to protect those who are most vulnerable amongst us. He said it did not make sense to take such extreme measures to shut down the economy and then allow those who are vulnerable to continue compromising their health by allowing smoking, he added. These are the empower uses that should be put into place as promoted by WHO. Smoking of any kind of tobacco reduces lung capacity and increases the risk of many respiratory infections and increases the severity of respiratory diseases. We have learned that COVID-19 is an infectious disease that primarily attacks the lungs and the respiratory diseases. Available research suggests that smokers are at a higher risk of developing severe COVID-19 outcomes and death. Among smokers who are aware of the dangers associated with tobacco, most want to quit. Counseling by you and, where necessary, medication can be more than double in attaining a status where people do not smoke. The COVID-19 pandemic poses great challenges for older adults and their families. Support system, caregivers, and medical, mental, and psychosocial health care providers. increased mortality among older adults following infections of SARS-CoV-2, the novel coronavirus we're talking about, is now well established. Older people already are vulnerable to the differential effects of isolation and face disproportionate adverse consequences from social distancing and shelter-in-place guidelines. These may trigger or worsen anxiety, depression, substance use, and other psychiatric disorders. Because of the pandemic, older adults may find themselves cut off from support if they are unable to effectively use online treatment and self-help resources. There are several key areas of clinical concern for psychosocial healthcare providers who work with these patients. So where are we at this moment? What have we learned this far is that the coronavirus called Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2, or SARS-CoV-2, is the cause of international outbreak of the respiratory disease known as the coronavirus disease, or COVID-19. We have seen that much like the common winter flu, the most common reported symptoms include fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath. We need a strong immune system, though, to protect us. Commonly, people have mild symptoms, which we attribute to the common cold. This can develop into flu, where about 80% of the cases, the symptoms are so mild. A small proportion develop pneumonia, which in more severe cases can result in other organ failure. What is important to recognize is that the evidence at the moment shows that the fatalities result in patients who are immunocompromised, either due to extremes of age or pre-existing conditions. We have also seen that there is no currently available treatment or the promise of a vaccine for COVID-19. Only the symptoms are being treated at the end, and when necessary, life support measures are used. Older adults are more vulnerable than younger adults to the virus, often as a result of the effect of substance use, including in the exacerbation of chronic medical and mental health conditions. These concerns are compounded in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. The already elevated risk of suicide in older patients has the potential to be increased by social isolation, anxiety and depression related to COVID-19 lockdown, and by alcohol and other substances which have already been examined. Disparities in income and resource-constrained healthcare coverage can exacerbate these problems. It is important for the future to understand how social isolation and health conditions may increase alcohol, medication, and substance use, including tobacco, among older adults, and how we can provide intervention strategies, including those offered through the telemedicine and social media, that can help to mitigate these problems. We as providers should be alert to potential increases amongst vulnerable patients. Risks to older adults can be addressed by helping to expand access to interventions and by incorporating the assistance of partners, family, and caregivers in helping older patients use healthier coping techniques and to manage their stress as the pandemic continues. More physical distancing and more social connection is what is needed. As we move from level 4 to level 3, experts have warned about a potential second peak in cases, especially in identified hotspots. This is accompanied by the season change that we are moving into with winter, which is associated with an increase in influenza. We have suffered from flu for millennia, but now we need to modify our approach by enhanced viral preparedness ahead of the surge in the case of a yet-to-come second wave. It is natural to assume that in times like this, during the crisis period, people are expected to encounter several mental health conditions and changes ranging from panic phobia, health anxiety, sleep disturbances, to dissociative-like symptoms. Along with these, addictive behaviors could emerge, especially amongst our teens. On the other hand, as the source of pleasures are limited to indoor activities, people spend a substantial period watching television and playing on other electronic gadgets and gaming, which includes gambling. As the impact of the pandemic lasting for a long time, the binge watching of television and electronic gadgets are also likely to persist, which may later result in behavioral addiction. A special focus is needed to prevent our youth in particular from developing the behavioral and gambling addictions that they are prone to develop. While drug users can increase the risks associated with coronavirus infection, the social and psychological risks of the pandemic can favor and intensify drug abuse in a potentially catastrophic cycle. Social distance, isolation, or quarantine have been associated with negative emotions such as irritability and anxiety, fear, sadness, anger, and boredom. These conditions are a trigger relapse, even in those long-term abstainers or intensify drug consumption. Withdrawal symptoms, illicit drug lockdown could also jeopardize preventive strategies, as it could drive individuals to go outside seeking for drugs. In addition, medical assistance for these symptoms will be limited, since the major medical effects are geared at the moment towards COVID-19 pandemic. Even in the case of hospitalization, it may be difficult to be admitted for a voluntary stay, as the healthcare workers are already overburdened because of the pandemic. We are aware that the homeless can also compromise preventive strategies, as individuals tend to wander in public places during the day and sleep in crowded places during the night, making them potential vectors of transmission. Addiction care must be reinforced instead of postponed. When hospitals are punished, or pushed rather, to their capacity, there is an added danger of a person with substance use disorder being deprioritized for care, even if they present with COVID-19 symptoms. It is incumbent on us to ensure that other healthcare workers do not discriminate against patients with substance use disorder, and to treat these individuals with the same compassion and dignity as they would others. We need to embrace new options such as telemedicine for mild cases of substance use disorder. Your addiction treatment facilities must adhere to preventive measures such as quarantine for recent admitted patients and minimal distance between beds. At the same time, social workers could ensure the role of an educator, counselor, a referral, linking care users to caregivers. Our counseling interventions should draw on resilience and relationship building strategies, as well as strength-based practices combined with a blend of families and individuals. The bottom line is that many people responded to acute stress by drinking heavily, which can adversely affect the immune functioning and increase the risk of pneumonia. So we must prevent heavy drinking during COVID-19 pandemic at all costs. Because alcohol-related immune system impairment increases susceptibility to pneumonia and other infectious diseases, minimizing alcohol consumption may be critical for older adults during the pandemic. Providers working with older patients, either in person or using remote technologies, should ask about current quality and quantity and frequency of alcohol use, and about recent increases in drinking that may be connected to social isolation or to financial stresses, anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. Brief behavioral interventions, such as motivational interviewing for patients with lower severity alcohol problems, can be effectively integrated into care with increased use of telemedicine. In the same context, social workers and therapists should advise people to eliminate smoke, tobacco, and nicotine vaping, and encourage patients to consider nicotine replacement using patches or gum, as smoking cessation reduces cardiovascular and other healthcare problems, like improving COVID-19 survival chances. Social support is crucial for people trying to recover from substance use disorder, where social isolation is a risk factor for relapse. Even though the social distancing measures are being implemented nationwide are important for reducing disease transmission, they may be especially difficult for persons in recovery because they limit access to meetings and to peer support groups or other sources of social connection. Although face-to-face interaction is a key feature of recovery support, virtual meetings may be useful for us using the access of the internet. Home-based quarantine will escalate family and relationship tensions and will likely lead to more violence against women, children, and others most marginalized in our families and communities. We need to identify strategies to calm tension and divert violence in our homes and communities over this time. We can deliver a strong education campaign against all forms of violence, especially domestic violence. We need to strengthen safe responses from existing neighborhoods, regional and national organizations supporting women and children. All healthcare workers, including social workers and therapists on the front line of the coronavirus pandemic, have to be functioning well in order to do their job well. At such a stressful time, with so much change and uncertainty, combined with the pressure of patient care during the pandemic, it almost seems like too much. Airline attendants say it well. If the plane hits turbulence and the oxygen masks come down, place a mask on yourself first before turning to help others. The same applies to you. If you don't, you may not be able to help anyone. We have all hit the same turbulence, and we all need to take good care of ourselves, our bodies, and our minds. I'd like to leave you with a final thought. Normality has changed. What is a new normal? That is for you to decide. But one thing is for sure. The inconceivable has disintegrated what was normal. We are all affected and psychologically challenged. We have to think and rethink everything, including our future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, David. Thank you very, very much for that very, very informative presentation. We had a few questions, and what I'm going to suggest is that these questions are answered on our ISSUP website. But one of the things was, and I think it is quite pertinent, is if it's possible for us to have the presentation that you put together that we could possibly post on our ISSUP website, if you're happy with that. Yes, thank you very, very much, David, for presenting this to us and giving us a further insight into what is happening in our world at the moment. And I think for me, the one thing that really stood out was the physical distancing and social connecting. So I think that that is something that we all should really, really care about, and for highlighting the dangers of alcohol consumption and COVID-19 and tobacco use in COVID-19. I think that that was essential to what we are working towards as ISSUP South Africa. So thank you very, 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 very much. To those of you who asked questions, I will I have kept a copy of the questions, and I will let you we will post them on ISSUP website and have them answered through David. And please don't forget our second session that is happening shortly with Sipakazi data from the MRC. Thank you very, very much. Thanks, David.
Thank you, my pleasure.